Hey everybody. Well, this has already been a famous disaster. I guess I wouldn't say famous, as nobody's here. But welcome. This is the world building stream. It is Sunday night. I have not done one of these in months. It feels like, at least since last year. So we're into March for when it's already started. I think the main problem is that for the most part, all of the work that I need to do for my Dwarven campaign is pretty much done. It's just a matter of waiting until I can actually get the group together, and I gotta finish Yogg to do that, but Yogg is close to being done finally, so the Dwarven campaign can actually begin hopefully sometime late spring or early summer. That's what I'm hoping for, which means that then, we'll have to find something else to do with our every other Sunday night streams. And that's the other problem too, is that I'm running like games for clients every other Sunday, so every other Sunday evening, so I can't stream those nights, and so it gets me in this position where it's like, okay, you have one Sunday night off every 2 weeks. Do you want to spend it streaming? And it's not that I don't want to spend it streaming, it's just that the combination of those two things, of having less to talk about and not as much time to do it in, it's proven kind of lethal towards my productivity on this. But I have good news, because today we are going to be doing some world building, because I have some stuff I need to do. So you may or may not be familiar, but I am running a home game right now, just for fun, just with some friends, that is set in my homebrew world of Ondûn. But it is set at a different time period. It is set much, much earlier than the Dwarven campaign would be, and that campaign just wrapped up its sort of Coom-themed arc. And so we are now going into a new location. This campaign is like a sort of globe-trotting military fantasy, very much like the Chain of Acheron, or like what was I gonna say? Or the Black Company, which inspired it. Very much like that, where the characters are members of a mercenary company, and they are sort of traveling around the world, getting themselves involved in all kinds of international politics. And so that is kind of the premise of this campaign, is that every arc, I call them every book, because there's an NPC who kind of chronicles everything that happens, again, very much like Croker in the Black Company. Each book, they go to a different part of the world, and then get involved in some new political situation. And so they have just wrapped up getting involved in some Dwarven stuff in Coom, and now they are headed somewhere else. They are headed across the world to a location called Throka's Cradle, and that's kind of the setting of our next arc in the campaign. And I have some thin notes about Throka's Cradle and the conflict that they're getting pulled into there, but there's a lot that needs to be fleshed out about its history and its politics and things like that, and who they are and why they're getting involved. And because it's Ondûn, and because everything is kind of interconnected in this setting, I thought it would be a great topic for a world building stream. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first, I'm going to run through basically what we know about the location and the setting, and then I'll probably talk a little bit about some world building conceits that are already kind of baked in that may not be as obvious. Oh, I forgot to turn my ring light on too. You guys, I'm a mess. You can tell how infrequently I stream now, because I don't even know how to do my stuff. Let me turn on my light here. That's better. Look at my human face. So we'll cover what I have here, and then we might talk about some basic world building stuff that's like unique to Ondûn, kind of core assumptions, that sort of a thing. Great, so you should see the map kind of located down here below me. This shows us the southeastern corner of one of the 5 continents of Ondûn. One of the 5 continents? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One of the 6 continents of Ondûn. Or 7, I guess, actually. And this is Oros. Oros is the centrally located continent. And because we are in the Second Age, it is still predominantly inhabited by orcs. This is kind of like the homeland of the orcish people in my world. In Ondûn, orcs are not rampaging monsters. They are one of the 3 great people, one of the kind of founding civilizations of the world, along with elves and dwarves. And the orcs are from here, and Oros is sort of like a vast primeval kind of paradise. Obviously very populated with orcs, and there are cities and things like that, but think of it kind of like almost like a savage land or a prehistoric world where everything, it's kind of that Texas expression, everything in Oros is bigger, right? There are redwood trees, and there's like megafauna, and there are all kinds of all the forms of life that live in Oros are all just like ratcheted up to 11. Gigantic dragonflies, like Jurassic style plant life, that kind of a thing. No dinosaurs here, but lots of prehistoric beasts, so saber-toothed cats and giant sloths and cave bears and things like that. All the animals are much bigger and more powerful. Basically, dire animals live here in Oros. Anyway, so we are centering it around this conflict between these two different powers in the southeastern corner. We have Throka's Cradle, and then we have the Cities of the Schism, or they have some kind of a league name. I'm very particular about my names, so I probably won't be naming too many things here on the stream, because I tend to find that's a little unfun to watch, as I'm just kind of like bandying around different ideas for names. So we'll just be using kind of generic terms unless there's already a name for it, like Throka's Cradle. So let me read you the summary of this conflict. The neighboring city-states of the League are making war on the remote orcish nation of Throka's Cradle. Their leader, Throka Throck, wants to hire the company to help defend his borders against attack and repel the invader forever. So it is very much a, we're being aggressed towards, like you're hired by the defensive power to try to resist the foreign invader. This has been my plan for a while, so this was not really inspired by any of sort of recent events, but it is ironic that they are kind of lining up in that same way. So I'm not really trying to make any comment about what's going on in Ukraine right now, but it has been on my mind that these plots are pretty similar. So we have our two different powers here. We have the League and we have Throka's Cradle, and we have the League, this like union of city-states that are sort of acting aggressively towards the Cradle. But if we want to get into that, we're going to have to talk about some of the history and the things you already know about these two powers. The party is being hired to, or the party's company, which is called the Menagerie, is being hired to come in and help out, being hired by Throka's Cradle to come in and help defend. So I'm imagining it's a lot of sort of besiege type stuff. Throka's Cradle is sort of, as you can see on the map, kind of located high up in the mountains. It's this kind of like fertile primeval valley that for whatever reason the League has designs on. And so it's going to be a lot of, patrolling the walls and maybe counter strikes and things like that to sort of break the will of the invader and their supply lines and things like that to try to defend the Cradle against invasion. So let's talk a little bit about the history of both of these two places and why they might be coming into conflict, and then we can kind of like drill down. I would love to develop three of the cities. You can see we have City A, City B, and City C here on our map. Those are, I think, the three kind of allied cities. I was inspired by, I've been playing a lot of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and I was inspired by the Delian League and like ancient Greek mythology, where Athens is trying to accumulate all these other smaller city-states and sort of have them work as puppets for them. I think it's something similar. I really like the idea of getting into the politics of these three cities and why they've chosen to align. It's also kind of similar in my thinking to the cities of Slaver's Bay in Game of Thrones, right? Like if you dig into the books, I believe it's Astapor, Yunkai, and Marine are those three cities, and the idea that they would have like similar cultures. Hey, what's up, Alan? Similar cultures, but they're not exactly identical. So that's one form. That's one kind of one side of the conflict. And then your other side is you have Throka's Cradle, and it's sort of considered to be like a holy site for the Orcish people. It's this primeval vale in the kind of, again, I said, like the mountains in the southwest corner of the continent. We'll dig into that in a little bit, but they're kind of the defenders trying to hold on to their territory. It's again, in the kind of way I like to do with my world building, I don't like to necessarily make clear good guys and bad guys. I like the idea that the Throka Throck, like the core that's holding the Cradle, are very conservative and very kind of like, they have these very traditionalist views that are maybe not necessarily in line with the party's views, but they're being hired by them. So the question is, how much do they hold up to it? One of the things I'm playing with this particular arc of the book, I would say the whole campaign is about the idea of like political narrative and like what nations tell themselves like about themselves or about their enemies and whether or not that's true. I like to think of it kind of as being almost like like a geopolitical noir in a certain sense, that the company, because it goes around and takes contracts from other nations and gets involved in other conflicts, that means they can kind of have an outsider's eye in the way that like a private detective does on both sides of the law. They can see, you know, the lies of these individual nations and the ways that they kind of like fool themselves, or the stories they project. It's easier for these mercenaries to see that than maybe even the lies that the company tells itself, right? So we'll talk about those themes and how we can weave those themes in just a little bit. But let's talk about our two different powers and what we know about them so far, what's been established in the lore of the world, and then how we can kind of flesh that out or play with it more. So starting with the League, this is a trio of allied city-states constructed along the eastern coast with cultural and economic ties both to one another and specifically to Throka's Cradle. Three pieces of history that I know already. That they were once founded by a powerful orcish Throck centuries in the past, in sort of the first age, the first epoch of the world. The city-states were the first orcish people to develop basically ocean-going travel, like way back in their prehistory. And they went out kind of plying the Draconic Ocean, which is the ocean that separates Oros from the other continents in this part of the world. So a few things to cover there. The orcs in my setting, that like traditionally, in the way that like dwarves are organized around clans, orcs are organized around a social unit called a corv. Qohrv, corv. The orcish language, its signature trait is that it uses a lot of cluster consonants. So it smushes like three consonants together, right? So Throka has the THR, and then corv has the HRV. So it's a strange word, but corv is the term. And they are these like semi-nomadic groups, usually big family groups that move around the territories. They usually control a certain area, but they tend to be semi-nomadic. They might have a couple of settlements. And again, this is the traditional way of living. And then over the course of the centuries, they began to adapt more towards city life. You know, as hunter-gatherer societies do, they drove more towards agrarian life. And then the more they interacted with other cultures, you know, humans, dwarves, elves, they started to adopt those things in the same way that some orcish practices were adopted by humans and elves and dwarves and that kind of a thing. So a Throck is the leader of a corv, kind of like a king or a monarch of some kind, a Khan. And the idea is that orcs live extremely short lifespan. Like an orc in Ondûn lives to be about 15 years old. It's like a very, very old orc. So their culture is all kind of based around the idea of making your short life mean something, right? If you're only around for a decade and change, then you're desperately kind of trying to leave some kind of an imprint, right? It makes them really great adventurers for that reason, because they're always trying to go out in the world and change things and solve problems and kind of find glory. But the Throck is the one exception to that. A Throck will live as long as their corv is still together, as long as it still has, sort of a controlling interest of orcs in it. So they, a Throck can rule for generations and generations and generations, as long as they still have like a strong support underneath them. So the idea here with the League was that, you had a powerful warlord who could have conquered a long stretch of territory and founded several of these communities, and used their sort of druidic magic that was one of the kind of cornerstones of orcish society to make these bone ships. We'll talk about how they feel about, wood and technology and things like that in a little bit. We might need to talk about it in just a second. And they basically had this kind of nautical empire that was reaching across the sea and trading with foreign powers and accumulating wealth that way. They were basically the first orcs to sail across the ocean and make contact with other peoples. That contact that they made, though, kind of led them to broaden their worldview, right? And to not have such a kind of limited sort of orthodoxy around how, they interact with the world. They saw these other cultures, trading and mining and using materials that they weren't using, and they kind of brought these ideas back home to their own culture and incorporated them, right? So they began to almost like modernize by seeing the rest of the world, this kind of globalization idea, right? And then that allowed them to trade with these foreign powers and the things that Oros could provide for them. So meat and hides and all kinds of stuff. They kind of began to skew away from the traditional orcish views. This, of course, did not go very well, and it sort of sparked a war with the local kind of traditionalist orcs that lived in the coastal forest. You can kind of see there. I'm imagining that area has kind of a Pacific Northwest, sort of San Francisco, like Redwoods kind of a vibe. The druids, the kind of traditionalist orcs, were defeated in this conflict, I think largely due to the fact that the League, the city-states, had access to these nations across the sea, and maybe forms of magic and forms of technology, weaponry that the sort of traditionalist orcs didn't have. But the kind of final act of these orcs that they came into conflict with was that the druids pushed them, sort of used powerful druidic magic to break away their cities from the coastline, kind of shove them out to sea a little bit. Which is interesting because if the hey, what's up, Jordan? Thanks for coming, man. It's lovely to see you. Hey, dude. Yeah, Deep Space Nine and Next Gen is one of my big blind spots. I really don't know DS9 or really Next Gen very well. Hallie, my wife, really likes TOS, so that's my Star Trek touchstone. Yeah, Jordan, that's cool, but it does sound like a very similar thing, right? They don't live very long. It's totally a lifespan thing. It's lovely to see you, man. Jordan is one of my old friends from middle school. How you doing, sir? Thanks for coming and hanging out. What I like about that conflict there between these kind of more modernist orcs and these traditionalist orcs is that in order to quote unquote win, in order to have their final say, they kind of compromise their values and damage the earth to try to symbolically push these cities out into the ocean. And so that's how you see that schism, right? It's literally a physical and a metaphorical schism. It's not very subtle, right? That separates these two powers. And so the idea was that then over the centuries, these cities develop and they become more modernized. And yes, they have orcish roots and there's a lot of orcish culture in there, but you are much more likely to find humans and elves and halflings and all different kinds of people in those three cities than you are to find in Throka's Cradle, for example, who is almost exclusively orcs and wargs. So we have three cities to develop there, but that's kind of the tenor. I think these are very they're much more cosmopolitan. They're much more, involved in trade and international relations and things like that than Throka's Cradle is, who is very isolationist and sort of conservative and inward looking, very strong on defense and not very interested in globalization. So that's one of our powers. I think the League is the aggressor here. And I have some very vague notions as to why, but I would love to strengthen that idea because I feel that would be that's what's missing in this conflict. Is it's arbitrary in the sense that I want these two powers to come into conflict, and there are thematic reasons why I want them to come into conflict, but I don't necessarily know what the narrative around that is. Great, so that's power one. That's the League, and then we have Throka's Cradle, which is the defending power. So. Considered by many to be the birthplace of the Orcish people, Throka's Cradle is an untouched and primeval valley that has been ruled by the same Throck for millennia. So this is kind of the far out extension of this idea that a single orc can rule one location, one corv, as long as the corv remains together and has the same idea. Basically, as long as imagine the president was the president for as long as America existed, rather than just either their term or even as long as their life. If their lifespan could last as long as there was some entity that was of that description. But because the corvs tend to break up and reform and move around by being nomadic, they tend to join up together or they tend to splinter or whatever. Throcks, can have a wide variance in how long they rule. Some will rule for hundreds of years. Some will rule for a week or a year. Some, like Throka Throck, will rule for thousands of years if they can maintain a stronghold. And so the history here is that the kind of the mythic legend, the mythic history that it's hard to verify. Yeah, Alan asks, what is in the mountains that isn't on the coast? Could be a lead towards an envy motivation. Yeah, I was thinking about this, and we're gonna dive into it. That's the only kind of idea that I had, was that it's something kind of natural resources based, but that feels very cheap. I feel there also has to be. I love Alan's description of an envy motivation. There has to be something more minerals is exactly what I was thinking. There has to be something more cultural in it too, right? What is the myth? Why does the League think that they need to conquer this? It can't just be because they have the most stuff and we want it. That could be a factor for sure, but there has to be some more thematic forces moving. So Alan's on absolutely the right track. and I'm excited to dig down on that. So legends say the orcs were first born here in this kind of pristine Throka's Cradle. It's a, you know, maybe a 20-mile wide like valley surrounded by these mountains. It's you know, beautiful kind of overgrown, like think Skull Island kind of stuff, right? Like it feels very much like the cradle of life. I mean, it's literally called Throka's Cradle, right? And the legends say that all the corves of Aros were splinters off from this first one, from Throka's Corve, from the very first one that was found here. Whether or not that's true, you know, that's definitely what the Throka Corve says. But different other corves might have different stories about that, and so there's some contention about that history, right? The Throka Corve is the most conservative of all. They endeavor to preserve the old ways of life and to kind of prevent the pillaging of the land by these greedy sort of merchant nations, right? They're looking to exploit. Let's dive into that culture. Like traditionalist orcish culture claims that like the very earth itself, the ground, is sacred, and the things that grow from the ground are also sacred. They can't be destroyed or defaced, right? You are meant to leave as little of a footprint on the earth as possible. The animals, though, they're seen differently. They're seen as being like the peers to the orc. So the orcs and the animals, they don't have the same gap as far as like I think we today think of like beasts as being something that we tame. I don't think that the orcs would have thought that. They would hunt them and they would contest them, but they don't necessarily view them as being inferior to them, right? They're kind of like in competition, and there's like a respect there. But that means that then orcish goods are always made from animal parts, you know? Again, kind of inspired by like Eurasian nomads. They're living primarily off of meat and milk and cheeses, and they're using hides and bone and leathers and tendons and stuff like that, catgut, for their goods. And that's kind of the traditionalist way of life. Obviously, you're going to find orc civilizations all over the world that have modernized and developed new ideas. But to make that more fantastical, they also have a form of druidic magic called bone shaping, which allows them to take bone and then reform it into different shapes to sort of serve as like an armor substitute, right? Or like a metal substitute. It isn't as strong as metal, but it can be strengthened, and it can be it basically has properties that metal can't have, right? So this is kind of what Throka is trying to preserve, right? It's like the old way where the earth is sacred and you don't mess with it and you preserve it, you protect it. And so all of their equipment and all of their technology is entirely based on sort of animal parts. You can also kind of in a pinch use some stone, you know, if you don't form it. You can use like dung, you know, you can use like dead wood or driftwood can be used because it's sort of like the scene is being discarded, but you can't fell anything. You can't you can't like cut grass or chop down trees or mine the earth or anything like that in the sort of traditionalist view. We've got a lot of chats here. So Jordan says, yeah, because this is an untouched primeval area that could develop some sort of resource that can only be found in Oros. I love that you guys are like using the terms. That's awesome. That the League wants to trade with the nations and societies they have met. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely something like that. There's some kind of I think there's something cool about it being a mineral resource because it's you know, you'd have to tear it up to get to it. It isn't just like we want to hunt the animals that live there or cut down the trees. Like something about the earth feels cool to me. But definitely conflict with the ancient traditions of Throka's Cradle, something they don't want spoiled. I mean, that's exactly right. Yeah, Jordan's on it. Could be a breeding ground for a valuable herd species like salmon. If you want to sell Oros beef or whatever, the Oros cows only get busy up in the mountains. Cows is a placeholder, yeah. Like a big magical cow. I mean, and I think that's okay, but I think the problem with that is that like the orcs would view that as more legitimate, right? That like they believe you can hunt animals, they believe you can even herd animals, right? Like they don't do a lot of like I think there's some herding. Different corps would have different beliefs on this, right? But like definitely there is a tradition of herding among them. There are herders and hunters and that kind of a thing, right? So like it could be an animal, but I feel like they would have less of a hang up about that, right? Point being, then yeah, they're trying to preserve this, and they're very much like timeless. Like they just kind of live in their place and they do their thing, and they don't really change much, right? They just try to endure the march of time. So as you can kind of see towards the bottom of the map there is a large area called the Spoils. The big kind of watershed event that just happened in the world about like 50 years ago. It was called the Night Wars, and it was this big global conflict against a nation of the dead called Thanatos, who like tried to basically spread out and conquer a bunch of extra territory at the end of the last age. And in the process, they kind of ecologically devastated a lot of the land that they conquered, right? That like sort of the necrotic power that was left behind by them sort of soiled the land. And Oros is one of the continents hit worst by this and has the most sort of damage to it. And so there's still evidence of the spoils down there. You can see it. But for a period of about 30 years, there was kind of like unending war on 3 different fronts in the world. And the Oros, the southern half of Oros, was definitely one of those. So during the Night Wars, the Cradle was a critical sanctuary for the allied forces of elves, dwarves, and orcs that fought the undead, including the party's mercenary company. So the mercenary company the party is a member of was originally basically like an orcish corps that was fighting against the undead that were invading, and kind of pushed them back. And then, oh yeah, go for it, Jordan. Thanks for letting us know. No worries. They pushed back against the invading undead. And eventually, over the years, once the war ended, kind of morphed into a mercenary company. There is a personal history between Throka and the leader of the company, who is also the mother of 2 of the characters. 2 of the PCs in the party are the commander's sons. And so there's a lot of drama there that we're going to play into. But basically, they served as a place that these sort of, armies or corps or battalions or whatever have you would end up having to like take respite in. And they did at one point even fight during the Night Wars. They sent a force to go try to push the last remnant of the dead back into the ocean. So they have kind of a complicated history with the Night Wars. And you can even see, I didn't mention this in the League's history, but you can even see on the map that southernmost city is right on the edge of the spoils. So something with that and the idea of their land going bad, or a disease. There is a really bad disease right now that's like running across the globe called black bloat. So it could be that the bloat is involved in some way, right? Maybe they're having trouble with their crops, or I don't know. That could be a part of it as well. So that's kind of the last piece that we have here is the sort of history of the Night Wars only being about 30 years in the rear view. Again, kind of think of it as like a World War I, big kind of catastrophe that it ends up breaking up, the alliance of these 3 big world powers. It has this huge kind of catastrophic effect on the world, even though they won. It leaves behind literally like the spoils of war. You can tell how subtle I am in my naming. I always like to have that entendre in there. Great. So that's kind of where we're at. So I'm synthesizing these ideas. I like Jordan and Alan and me both talking about this. The idea of it being a resource. I like minerals. I think minerals is maybe a little. It feels like it's easier to understand and it's easier to grasp as to why the orcs of Throka's Cradle wouldn't want that. Alan says the spoils would continue to grow if something in Throka's Cradle weren't maintained. Huh. That's pretty interesting. So there is a period in, like, there's a gap of time. So basically, the wars end about 30 years ago, right? The wars end about, 30-ish years ago. And then, or 40 years ago. Yeah, the wars end about 40 years ago. And then for about 30 more years, there's this period of cleanup where a lot of the people that fought in the war kind of went home and left the spoils for the local population to deal with. The local population, of course, including the current commander of this mercenary company, and this mercenary company that was originally like this ragtag group of orcs and elves and dwarves. And they were, tasked basically with cleaning up all of this horrible, decrepit, like any of the roving undead, anything like that. And so, like, there was this long, prolonged period of cleanup, and I think that the commander of the army is kind of embittered towards the powerful nations of the world because they were here for the fighting, and the minute the fighting was done, they left, and they left her to clean it up. And she does have a close relationship with Throka's Cradle, so, like, there's something cool about, like, there's some power or something there that is the thing that's keeping the spoils from advancing. The spoils in general don't really advance anywhere else in the world. So we'd have to figure that out, but it's a cool idea because it does then like put these bigger like stakes on it. Is that the reason the League is getting involved? Like, I don't know. That's interesting. But I mean, there's some synergy there for sure. let's talk about the League a little bit, or let's talk about the material resource, you know, that they're because I like the idea that like they say they're after one thing, but they're actually after another, or like the story they're telling, you know, their people is different than the story they're telling the Cradle. Like I like that idea of we're playing with this notion of political narrative. The big theme I want to explore here with this contract is that, you know, what happens to a nation that is sort of forced to betray its own ideals, right? That like the tension between, can Throka's Cradle change? Can the core of like embrace new technology? Can they adjust their thinking in order to survive? Or will they go extinct because they refuse to kind of compromise their identity and their narrative, you know? That's what, like, a lot of the characters in the campaign right now are going through kind of big personal changes. So I thought this would be a good contract because it would really emphasize that idea of change, right? And who you are now and who you're going to be on the other side of it. And will you recognize yourself when you get there? You know, that kind of a thing. But think of that on like a national scale. It's very literary to think of that way, but I think it helps me kind of keep my brain on, keep my eyes on the prize, right? So let's talk about their like resources. What if it's some sort of spice that's used in their druidic magic that's basically forbidden to be used by outsiders, but have become extremely valuable to outsiders with the League? Yeah, it's some kind of a... That's interesting. Like, I even like the idea, like combining those thoughts, that like, you know, if it is a mineral, it somehow like amplifies or empowers their druidic magic, right? It does, like, and but it's in the ground. You know what I mean? They're not mining it. It's just like the natural deposits in Throka's Cradle. I mean, you could even go so far as like a really simple one might be like, what if there's like soil? You know, the soil here. So let's put resources in like option ideas. Resources. Option A. Because I'm thinking like, hey, what's up, Castle Red Fox? What if there's like a mineral in the soil? There's a mineral in the soil that makes the druidic magic more powerful. You know, maybe it makes the plants grow. Can you guys see that, by the way? I want to make sure you can. Yeah, okay, cool. You can see it. Makes the plants grow, you know, taller, more verdant, like good for crops. From giant primeval mushrooms. But like, I like the idea that they have like, there's a mineral in the soil of Throka's Cradle that would actually make agriculture really, really powerful and good, but they don't use it because they don't like till the soil, right? That it's like they're wasting it. Especially if you're playing with this idea that like the, after the Night Wars, the crops of the League, like agricultural breadbasket, failed and died due to famine, like caused by the spoils or something like that, right? There's like a food rot thing. They seek a means to like restart their failed, you know, harvests. Like I like the notion of it being a mineral in the soil. It's like something really minor, you know, that like they've detected, and you know, yes, maybe it empowers their druidic magic because it's you know, from the earth, but it's also something that like they're not really using. You know, they're not exploiting it in the way that like the city would, and like exploit to feed their people. You know, like they're having this like widespread famine, and like people are hungry, and that like it's seen as this move to try to revitalize their crops and their fields and stuff. You know, because to me, like, mining and agriculture are like the two big industries that the orcs of Throka's Cradle would really see as an affront, you know? That's right, the orcs in 40k are actually really cool. I'm jealous of those orcs. I think that they're actually very well designed. From what I know of them, I think they're neat. You know, so something I like it being agriculture or mining, and I think it being a mineral in the soil makes it more interesting than if it's just like they have gold or something like that, right? So I love Jordan's idea that it amplifies their magic, but they don't really use it for anything except that magic. There is also a plot point about an important NPC to the characters who was recently like sort of grievously wounded in a battle with a dragon and had their like skeleton kind of melted and weirdly like sort of deformed. And so they're seeking someone, they're seeking a master bone shaper who could potentially like reset their skeleton. And so they were going to come here anyway because this is where they believe them to be. And this might be a reason why, right, why their bone shaping is so much more powerful in the Cradle is because they have access to this mineral. What's interesting to me, though, is that, like, would they think of the mineral as being, like, do they know about minerals is basically my question, right? If we're talking about, so to give you some context, this is set earlier in my world, so the level of technology we're talking about is more of an ancient world Roman Empire thing. We're talking about triremes, you know what I mean? And we're talking about, like, Greek fire and that kind of stuff. We're not talking about Victorian level stuff technology. Obviously, you get exceptions like my dwarves, as far as like engineering goes, are much more advanced than sort of the rest of the world. But like, if we're talking about a, you know, sort of like Bronze Age level of, I don't know what that is. You know, we're talking about like antiquity. Do they have a real strong conception of what a mineral is? I mean, I think they would just know the soil is rich, right? Like, and then it's magically rich. But they are druids, so like maybe they do have a really sophisticated idea about it. But they can't take like samples. You know, is there a visible phenomenon in the soil? Visible phenomenon in the soil. Like, you know, does it sparkle? Does it phosphoresce? Like, you know, do they have some reason to believe that this is more than just ordinary soil? Like, because you know, the League's goal could be, rather than like harvesting the soil, it could be to turn the Cradle into a breadbasket, right? To conquer it. And I kind of think that's better than, like, because just scraping the soil out isn't going to work. Like, they would have to take it over and turn it into a place to grow food. Yeah, they just know the land is special. That's what I'm saying. My thinking is more like, what do they believe it is? You know, and I think Alan's right that they just think the land is special. You know, I like the idea of there being some kind of visible sign that you could refer to it, or that it wouldn't just be like, this is a magical place, right? Like, you know, they would have a more sophisticated idea of that. But yeah, they don't need to pinpoint the molecule. You're exactly right. To conquer Throka's Cradle and convert its rich soil into a new breadbasket to help feed their famished people. So they are like good at, they do have this like trading empire as well. So like, you know, are they actually famished? Is this actually a concern? You know, which one is the story and which one is real? Like, again, without going too far into the kind of the Ukraine situation right now, I think there is something really interesting about, if you look at the history of the Kievan Rus and Russia, like does the League, if you think about, you know, this legend, like, do they believe they have some claim on the Cradle, right? Is there some kind of a story about that? Like, what is the narrative they're telling themselves about why they're basically allowed to do this? You know, like why they have, like, what is their pretext for going in? Like, you can't just decide, okay, well, I say this, you know, knowing full well what's going on in the world, but it's you can't just decide, okay, we're going to go take over this place because it would make my life materially better. That might be why you want to, but you would need some kind of a pretext or a reason to get in there, right? Like, what is that pretext, and how does it how do they kind of justify moving in? Politically, what's interesting about, I think, these cities is that I don't think that they have identical forms of government. I like the idea that each one of the three important cities in the League is run very differently. Like, if you think about like Athens and Sparta and like how different culturally those two are, like they were often rivals, but that's kind of what we're talking about. These like very autonomous city-states. You know what I mean? Yeah, I know, right? The irony. I really probably should be talking out of my ass. Like, it sounds absurd, but I'm trying to make this a little bit more robust. I like the idea of like their politics for these individual cities would be very different, right? Like, you could see one where like it's the whole city is basically one core, and so then you have like a Throck that rules one of the cities. You know, a Throck. They just want to demilitarize it, yeah. Exactly. Um, and then there's one that's like a council of Throks, right? Where it's like there are multiple corps inside the city. You know, this district is a corps, and this district is a corps, and this district is a corps, and then they all, you know, have a council. They're like the cities are not ruled by the same government. I think they're all kind of like they were once cities in the grander empire, in the ancient empire. You know, this kind of seafaring bone ship empire. The leaders of the league maybe want to profit off the soil while using the famine to justify it to their people and those they are allied with. Yeah, they want to profit off of it. You know, is there something else they're growing? Are they doing other magic? Like, I'm almost trying to think of like what is the you know, what is the pretext that they use? Why do they go in now? You know, I like the idea of the famine, and I think that like, but it's like if they're this kind of trading power, you know, if they have these ships and this like naval presence, then it's odd to me that they would turn first to conquest and the expense of war rather than just getting their food from overseas. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be an easier way to do that than to conquer Throka's Cradle. If there's a like, they can all agree they all agree they want Throka's Cradle. Yeah. The question is like, what is the myth that they tell themselves, right? What is the story here that justifies to them like that the cost of the war is worth it when they could just pay a slightly higher tariff and import stuff, you know? I guess maybe that's not sustainable. Maybe they're getting screwed financially, right? With like, you know, taxes and stuff, but that still feels kind of weak. Like that might be a contributing factor, but there's no like, there's no cultural baggage in there, you know. Like what hearts and minds kind of a thing, right? Not just the purse. Yeah. I also love Jordan whenever Jordan is referring to the league. He does it in all caps, like he's honoring that it's league, right? Which I appreciate. I love that. It's awesome. So I'm trying to think, like, do they, you know, was there something about like the founding Throk of the cities of the schism, right, of the league? Like, were they, you know, yeah, okay. So one of the characters in the party is the son of Throka Throk, of this like ancient Throk that rules Throka's Cradle and has since, you know, quote unquote the dawn of time. But because he's so long lived, they all have different reasons. Alan says grievance A. It's a grievance grudge. These orcs in the Cradle have been looking down on us for too long. That's cool. Yeah, maybe they all have different, slightly different reasons. I like that. Yeah. Grievance. Economics. Maybe City 2 is run by like guilds. Right? It's like a technological magical reason for doing it. That's cool. What if one of the cities of the league believes it has a legitimate claim? But yes, there it is, and is using these things as a pretext to ally with the others and conquer it. Yes, I think that's exactly right. I think that's grievance. I think that's City A. Now we're getting into the juice. This is the stuff that I like. Council of Throks. Like, is there a religious reason? So here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I think is really juicy. Okay, so the one of the party members is a son of Throka Throk, the leader of the Cradle, right? The son of the leader of the mercenary company, and Throka Throk, right? And they're running around. They're in the company. You know, they're an officer or whatever. What's interesting about that is that like if Throka Throk is this like ageless Yoda-like orc who has just lived forever and will continue to live forever, then there's no way this is his first child and his first wife or whatever. He's not married to the PC's mom, but you understand what I mean, right? There's no way those are his first children. You know, like if he's been around that long. The children of Throks live as long as the Throk does, basically. And so, you know, they can have very long lifespans. What if the founder what if this Throk, the founder of the League, was one of Throka's earlier children, right? And so they went off and they founded their own, you know, corv and made all this stuff and was this very successful conqueror. But then City A, who's ruled by a Throck, like considers themselves the descendant of Throka's Cradle, right? Because they were, you know, like, when do I get to have it? What's weird about that, though, is that, like, if Throka Throck is still in power, then what grievance do they have? You know, like it's not like I should have inherited it, because, like, he's never died. He's still there. You know, that's what's weird about the orc lifespan thing. But I like that a lot. I like that, like, the pretext. I don't know what the initial thing is, but, like, the thematic agenda is that the league considers themselves the descendants of Throka Throck. And, like, they are on some level. Like, that guy's still around. Throka Throck. Yeah, he's totally like Genghis. That's exactly right. That's absolutely who he's like. Considers themselves the descendants of Throka Throck and believes they have a claim to the land. You know, they are the firstborn or something like that, right? They have some kind of they deserve the fruits of the cradle. This city is ruled by a Throck, perhaps Throka Throck's grandchild, the child of the original. So it's like Throcks on Throcks on Throcks. It's Throcks all the way down, who founded the cities of the schism. Yeah, so they have like a grievance of the schism. I think the economics here, I think City B is the biggest. You can kind of see there on the map that it's got kind of the most territory. Jordan says, might not work with the timeline of how long orcs live, but one could have been a hero of the Night Wars and believes that this gives him claim to the rule of Throka's Cradle. Oh no, that actually works, Jordan. That's cool. I like them having been a hero of the Night Wars. No, you're good. Because if they're a Throck, then they live as long as their sort of corv does. Their people live, right? Their tribe or whatever. Were they a hero of the Night Wars? 2. The commander of the mercenary company the party works for, they were like a big hero in the Night Wars as well. So the idea of there being kind of like a foil to that's cool. They believe this gives them a claim to the throne, to the cradle. They helped defend it. I mean, you could even play with the idea of, like, maybe Throka Throck didn't really fight much in the war. Like, I think he sheltered people, but I wonder if he didn't actually do much. Yeah, there's a Some Throcks, the new one game for orc kids. Of Pogs, yeah, exactly. It's just Throcks on Throcks. Were they a hero in the Night War 2? So, talking about number 2, their interest in the cradle is entirely economic. They want the mineral. They want to turn the cradle into a breadbasket that produces all year round. Pizza Hut Book It days. I don't remember. I don't know what those days are. Oh, Pogs. I see what you're saying. Yeah. I get you. I remember. Did you have to do those? Yeah. Are you talking? Is that like breeding contest you had to do for with Pizza Hut? Because that's when you say book it, that's what I imagine. Is that a thing for you as well? I was gonna say it's a thing where I'm from in Minnesota. I'm like, Jordan's from Minnesota. He remembers. And then I'm interested in this magical reason, right? Like, is this City C could have a more druidic kind of a focus, right? Like, I mean, the other thing I think might be interesting about City C, excuse me, that was a gross burp. But if you look at it, it's right near the edge of the spoils. So maybe it's something like that, where like they needed to like stave off that it's like survival. They're affected worse by the famine, and their people are starving. The soil if it get pizza for lying about how many books you read. What are you talking about? Lying. The soil, if it could be replicated here, it was sick. If it could be replicated here, could save their people. Like, I actually kind of like that one of them is City C is actually the one that is like the most hurt and could really use the help, right? Whereas like City A and City B have much more kind of grievance or greed based reasons for going in, you know. So now it's just like, yeah, I love that. It's just like tapestry of different ideas. Oh, what's up, everyone's favorite? It's Anad Malki. What's going on, Anad? Thanks for coming. Let me just real quick remove your comment. I should report them as well. They're a bot. Spam. Okay, cool. Yeah. I think that's cool. Okay. So what I would love is a little bit more of the pretext as to like not what their like, you know, conceit is, but why do they start it? Like, is there some sort of a what's the Franz Ferdinand here? Like, what kicks it off? Because by the time Throka has summoned the company, you know, there needs to have been enough rumor of war that this is going to be a problem. We don't want to have like a long period of like waiting around for the thing to happen. You know, maybe some of that, but like I like the idea that there was some incident that has like, you know, presaged this happening. Why would they be doing it? It could be nice and vague. It could just be like, oh, you know, he's been seeing scouts, like he has reason to believe that they're allied, blah blah blah, right? But like, I like the idea of like, what is the maybe it was a thing where like they sent, you know, the League sent like ambassadors to, you know, speak with Throka and take their, like, and, you know, ask them for crops or, you know, help with the soil. No, it's like they sent to speak with Throka about the famine, but while there, they were caught, examining the soil. The demolition of a bone bridge over the schism. That's cool. I do think one of the cities has a bridge over the schism, and I think it's like a dwarven bridge. Like they brought in like contractors, though a huge bone bridge is pretty cool. They were caught examining the soil or disturbing the earth. Throka held them. Yeah, Throka held them, and this sparked the outrage. Maybe did Throka execute them? Yeah, a spiritual or religious heresy. Yep, you're exactly right. And it's like you know, it's if you come into the place and you do this, then you know you get this punishment or whatever, right? And it's like, I don't care if you don't have diplomatic immunity if you do this religious heresy thing. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so he executed them. This was almost like there's an argument to be made that like this is kind of what they wanted, or maybe like what City 2 wanted, you know, was like a pretext. There's an argument to be made that City B, or that some faction in the League, City B perhaps, wanted something like this to happen as a pretext to invade. You know, I like that. That's cool. Okay, so I want to drill down on these cities a little bit, and try to like flesh them out a little bit more, like their culture and their kind of vibe and like what's going on. Because there's a chance, like when the party gets here, what I think is going to be interesting is that they are going to have to, like, the best way to get to Throka's Cradle from where they're coming is through the cities of the Schism. So like I like the idea of them having to like land, you know, in City C or whatever, and then like march through the city to go up into the mountains and then join, you know, the enemy, you know, that you have to kind of like go through, because technically they haven't like signed with Throka's Cradle until they get there, and so it's like they're not doing anything wrong, but they know that's why they're going. Maybe the spoils of the schism cut off the League's route to their access to the soil, and the League has been trying to find another way around. But the land is claimed by the Cradle. Yeah, I mean, I think the slopes of the mountain could definitely be claimed by them. Ooh, the other thing I wanted to play with was, let's go here under defenses, that in addition to the orcs, the Corv has allied with a large warg pack that patrols the mountains. Well, a large warg nation that hunts and patrols the mountain slopes. So they have wargs that can kind of like keep an eye on things. The wargs in Ondûn are less of, again, don't think Tolkien wargs. They're wolves, but they have a kind of symbiotic relationship with the orcs. Imagine like if the Mongols' horses were intelligent, right? It's kind of like that, where they're like these two species that live in close symbiosis with each other. So if you have most orcish corvs have, you know, some relationship with the nearby group of wargs, you know, who are intelligent and have their own language and all that stuff. Okay, yeah, that's cool. So I like that idea of they're trying to find another way around. Let's dive into these cities a little bit. I want to talk about like, okay, let's do like history, politics, and like warfare. You know, what did they kind of get up to? So, it was all once, so for the history of these individual places, so we don't have to get too crazy into the individual history of these three cities. Ooh, let's put economics in there too. Yeah, that's the other big category I'm not thinking of. Economics. So all three of the cities of the schism were originally like cities in one large world power. Right, there was an empire, and it was ruled over by the parent of this particular Throck. Let's get some genders in here because I'm tired of he's and she, like theys and theys all the time. I want to figure out who we're talking about here. Okay, let me roll that d3. So, the Throka Throck is male, that we know because they're one of the characters' fathers, and then their child is also male, and then their child is male again. Okay, now let's change that up. So their child is male, and then a male again. Okay, too many men. Let's get at least one woman in there. There we go. Okay, so the founder of the empire is a woman. So it's Throka's daughter. Let's go. Founded by Throka's daughter. Throka's daughter. Now ruled by Throka's son. I guess this is kind of more politics. City A is one. Yeah, let's put this under politics. City A is one Corv, all united beneath the Throck, or Throka's grandson. Sorry, not son. Grandson. Beneath the Throck, who rules the city. There's like a cult of personality. Let's put that under culture. Yeah. There's a cult of personality to both Throka's daughter and Throka's grandson. I like the idea that like Throka Throck himself is seen as, you know, almost more like the way we see the UK in America, right? Where it's like we owe something to them for sure, but they're like an oppressive parent, right? An oppressive parent that City A like escaped from. You know, it's time to, you know, take back our birthright, kind of a thing. You know, like what kind of a like like political acrobatics do you have to do to be proud of your heritage, but then go to war with your heritage? You know, it's like the act that they revere isn't. And I think that's a very American idea, right? Like, we don't revere England. You know, we kind of consider England to be sort of like the soft enemy. Like, we escaped from them. Right now we're allied or whatever, but like, you know, the British and King George and all that stuff. Like, it's a very King George style figure where like, if the British, the constitutional Congress and whatever, Continental Congress, I really don't know. If the founding fathers, there we go. If the founding fathers like really were honest with themselves, they would acknowledge they were much more British than they were American, right? They're like, the natives are American, but like they're British, and they're telling themselves like, no, we're pushing away from this British monarchy that doesn't represent us anymore, right? Like, if we were to go to war with England and try to invade it, we'd have to kind of make this like logical leap for ourselves. And like, I think enough time has passed that it's easy for them to do. But they're hearkening back to the idea of like the founding fathers, of Throka's daughter, you know, his mother. Yeah, that's cool. I'm into that. Okay. So history of this city in particular. Why did, like, to me it seems like city B is like bigger and wealthier. So why is this city like, is this the first city that they founded? Was this the original capital of the empire? Yeah, I think so. This is the original capital of the Daughter's Empire. The Daughter's Empire. It's also the military center, right? Where the first bone ships were made. Who did they like fight? They would have had to have had some kind of an enemy, like some other orcish presence that lived just to the north of them, right? But like, yeah, they're used to defense. They're very kind of martial. Well, they would have fought the original orcs, right? The ones that try to push them out. Yeah. Their army was the strongest. Ooh, I love that, Alan. That's totally right. Yes. He never fought them in the Night War. Maybe that's better. Yeah. They didn't get down there. Interesting. Which implies to me then that the League is pretty recent, right? That wouldn't be a Night War thing. It would have been like each one of those cities would have been for themselves. Like, did the Empire fall in the Night Wars, maybe? It's kind of cool. Maybe it's older than that. But I love the idea that they're super militarized, but it's all kind of like show military, right? Think like North Korea. Yeah, that's cool. The army was the strongest, and they fought. But they fought precious little. A cult of martial prowess. I like that. I actually think that's really strong because it tells you a lot about that character. Okay, economics, I'm not so sure about. Oh, that's kind of under warfare too, right? I was like start off to write the history one, and then I'm like, no, that's actually somewhere else. Of the three, sorry, this is such a mess, guys. I'm just trying to get my ideas down. Of the three cities, City A is the most militaristic, but the furthest removed from the spoils. I guess this is history, actually. God damn it. Okay. City A built the first bone ships. Waged war against the Druids, but never fought in the Night War. So I think like his mother, Throka's daughter, the one who founded the Empire, did fight the Druids, the ones that pushed them out. But then when he came into power, he did not fight in the Night Wars. He held his troops back, right? Like, yeah, I think that's cool. This is because another thing that would be really cool too is that like if you're trying to build like plot avenues into the story, right, for the players to like exploit, like what are the divisions between the cities, right? Like if City C really suffered heavily in the Night Wars because they were the closest, then City A, who had the strongest military, never fought in them. So there's a division you could lead right there. Why didn't City A come to City C's defense? You know, like they could have helped them and they didn't, right? This is a potential wedge between between city A and city C. Okay, cool. I love that. That's great. Economics. This, I was gonna say this is the major shipyard, but that doesn't really make sense if city B is the most is like the wealthiest, right? Let's go to city B for just a little bit. So I think historically it was like the major trading port. The major trading port of the empire. It's certainly the most powerful now. It's grown to be the most powerful. The most powerful. Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell? Exactly, Jordan. Exactly. I love that. That's perfect. It's going to be the most powerful, the wealthiest, and the most powerful. The wealthiest and the most powerful. But doesn't care. They hire out muscle. Yeah. Ooh, that's cool. Yeah. It doesn't care as much about the political rah-rah. Rah-rah. Economics. Center for trade. Center for trade. City B is a free-flowing valve for foreign goods to enter the cities of the schism. And everybody kind of buddies up to them. Like, it's very important to keep them economically, like to keep them kind of politically appeased, because they can shut you out, right? They could impose sanctions or whatever to prevent you from being able to get that stuff, right? Like, they are kind of the daddy of the group, you know what I mean? Like, I like, for all city A's like posturing, I think city B actually has the power, right? Because they have the money. And they're the ones who can feed people because they can bring in the food. Politics. You think so? Because I kind of think that that would be the opposite, but maybe you're right. Maybe because they don't need it as much, right? Probably took the most convincing to be a part of the scam to retake Throka's Cradle. Maybe you're right. They do have a good thing going. Yeah, I think that's interesting. The guilds, so that might be a good like wedge you could drive there, right? The guilds that rule, like the city has a nominal ruler, but in truth, it's the trading guilds that wield the real power. They were hesitant to enter into a war because they're wealthy enough. Like, this is a wedge. This is a potential wedge between city B and the rest of the league. That's cool. I dig that. And then warfare is they hire out. Yeah, warfare. They hire mercenary armies. So I love the idea that, like, if the party comes through here, they could potentially pose or have to dodge questions about why they weren't hired. You know, like if like there's this muster of mercenary armies that are going to city B, right? If they're going to go work for Throka's Cradle, why didn't they go work for them? Like, if they land there, especially if they're hiring out. Yeah, they need a new place to live. Yep, dude, you and I are in sync with this. Absolutely. Cool. I love that. So then let's talk about C. So this one's interesting to me because, like, I don't know necessarily what the significance of this city is. Like, I understand it's more recent, like, history, right? Like, it was the most devastated. The most devastated during the Night Wars. City C is struggling to survive. Its people are like, what if like there's a section of the city that's entirely quarantined. Like, even saying that they're like, they like separated by the schism, right? Was this city split in half by the Druids? That like, so I was thinking that the schism happened like along a river. That they would have like, you know, pushed it out that way. So there was a river that like ran along that coast, and they like shoved them out that way. So maybe City C is on the edge, and like one half of the city is on one side of the schism, and one half of the city is on the other. And that like during there's this disease called Black Bloat, which is the kind of like bubonic plague, you know, or the trench foot of the Night Wars. It's this disease left behind by the undead. So maybe they have like quarantined, you know, one half of the city and the other side, right? Like either across the, like either on the island or on the mainland, and saying like, okay, you know, that you're here now. That's cool. I like that. Economics. I don't know what their economics are like. I don't know what City A's economics are either. I mean, they're kind of just dependent. Like right now, they have very little. They have very little. Maybe they were once a breadbasket. Yeah. They grew the food, but now with the war, or with the famine, they depend entirely on trade. They're ruled by a council of Throks. Each neighborhood is a separate corv. They split their own island in half. Oh, man. That's really cool. Yeah. This was the Druidic island. All the way down to that gray piece of land. Let me look at the map again. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So I love that, Alan. That's great. Even though City A created the first bone ships because they broke with the Druidic City C, the Druid City C now holds the most magic prowess, as they've been constantly using it. Yeah, I like that. That's cool. Yep. Let's see. Better. They split their own city in half. One half is on the mainland. Because I like them being... Oh, no, yeah, one half is to the south, yeah. One half is... But I guess that means they would have had to have been, like, pushed away from the land and then separated again. You know, which feels like a lot. Like, I think there's probably a city on that gray spit of land, too. Right? Like, I think maybe there was a city on that little gray island there that's now a ruin. And maybe that one was the... maybe that one was the breadbasket. Right? And so, like, now that's gone entirely, and City C is the closest. Yeah. I wonder. Because I like these ones being more religious. That's cool. One half is on the mainland. One half is on the island. They have very little left. Their neighbor and sister city was swallowed entirely by the spoils. Now they have no one to trade with and rely. Now they have no food and rely entirely on foreign trade. Cool. By Council of Throks, each neighborhood is a separate corv, and they vote on various provisions. There's strife because some of the districts have been displaced, and this to make room for the quarantine. I like the idea that, like, the mainland section is the quarantined one. The island is the, like, haven, right? That, like, it's the mainland population. They didn't quarantine the island. They said the island is the better part. It's like the mainland is the worst, right? I guess let's look at it. I think that kind of makes sense. I just think it's the opposite of what you'd expect. I think that's sort of more interesting. So their warfare, yeah, they have very little military, but what they do have is druidic magic. Yeah, that's cool. They had to make the difficult decision to basically lance a huge wound to save what was currently unaffected. Yeah, that's awesome. So this is actually a potential wedge. This is a potential wedge inside City C, right? Inside City C, if you could get them to turn on each other, right? They might drop out entirely. Service economy. They fix curses, heal wounds. That's cool. A service economy. Yeah. I think they're also like the smallest city. Their druids perform religious service. They fix curses and heal wounds. Create weapons. Well, I mean, I actually kind of think they would make bone weapons, right? Although maybe that's the thing that the druids of City A are better at. Yeah, heal wounds. They nourish crops. Predict the weather. Control the weather. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, yeah, I think that's really good, y'all. I think that's cool. So let's see. We've got a little bit of time. I might end a little early because I'm still churning all these ideas around, but I think that's really neat. I want to talk a little bit about Throka's Cradle and their kind of like their defenses and their like their structure and like almost like the stages of the war. Like what kind of tactics would they take and what kind of resistance would they face and things like that. Excuse me. So I see the Cradle as being mostly natural barriers. It's like up in the mountains. But I like the idea that the orcs of the Throka Corps have built massive, like, they built kind of like Night's Watch style walls of bone, you know, like rib cages. Is the quarantine portion still fairly heavily inhabited? It could be dealing with split families that want to reunite. Could be infighting in the city itself, not just between the other city. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think the quarantine city is largely still inhabited. Yeah. Yep. It's like people who have it go over there to die, right? And then when you get it, you get sent over there. Yeah, that's what I mean. I think there's a lot of interdivision in City C that could be exploited, for sure. So I like the idea of there being almost like strongholds that guard the passes, right? That there are like, yeah, let's talk about the defenses here. There are X number of passes that enter into Throka's Cradle. Each one is protected by like a bone fort. A stronghold made and maintained by the Throka Corps military. They wouldn't have like tunnels or caves because they can't shape the land, right? Like I like that being a weakness. Like one of their weaknesses, there has to be some manner of, let's do that. Like let's come up with a couple of like, one of the big themes I want to play with is the idea of like that the core of the Throka's the Cradle is basically vulnerable. The Cradle is vulnerable to their attackers because they refuse to modernize, right? That like, as much as you might want to have the kind of like the nature ones win out, like I like the idea that because they refuse to modernize, this puts them at a disadvantage immediately in the war, right? That like there are things that they can't do because they refuse to, right? Ooh, giant redwood trees that are like towers on a bone wall. That's pretty cool, yeah. Stretches of wall with redwood trees as towers. So like what are some of these weaknesses? Like I like the idea of there being at least one like geographical weakness. Like there's definitely a technological weakness, right? Technological weakness. The orcs of the Corv have bone armor and weapons compared to the steel, or the iron, I guess. Yeah, the iron of the league. It's tricky though because they can make that bone more powerful, right? Like it feels like it has to have some kind of a. I feel like they'd have to use projectiles because they're hunters, right? Like they've got to have bows and stuff, bows of horn. Like it's hard to imagine a hunter society without a projectile weapon. Like you never catch anything without a thrown spear or an arrow. It's a great idea. It's just like, I'm trying to figure out what, like, I just want there to be a couple of like very obvious, like explicable things. Like I like technology being a weakness. I like geography being a weakness. And I like sort of like kind of what you're suggesting, Alan, like something that's like a principal weakness. Geography. Technology, geography, and then like, ideology. Like an ideological weakness. Ideology? Yeah, ideology. Like, I think that there's some... I want to strengthen this one, because this feels, like, too obvious to me. There's a... Ooh, do they not use fire? No, they have to. They have to warm themselves on, like, dung fire and stuff, right? But, like, they refuse to burn... I guess that's maybe ideology. Like, they refuse to burn... or cut down trees or damage the landscape in any way. Right? They refuse to burn or cut down trees or damage the landscape in any way during their attacks. So like they're very careful. They don't use anything incendiary. We got a huge to-do list, yeah. That's a huge, probably, listen, I gotta go to the store. Maybe the pass controlled by the city-states was to the south and was overtaken by the plague spoils. Now the only other X number of passes are also controlled by the Cradle. It could be that feels like a weakness that the city-states have, right? Pass controlled by the city-states was to the south and was overtaken by the plague. I actually don't even think that the city-states would have a pass like that they would control, right? Like I like that though. They are kind of like surrounded there. They would have to kind of go to the north. I like the notion of like for a plot device that one of like that they have 3 armies or whatever, right? The city-states managed to muster 3 separate forces or whatever. And they send one army like marching way north around the Cradle all the way over to like an eastern or western pass, right? Yeah, they can't create proper moats or ditches or walls because they won't dig the earth. Exactly, that's totally what I'm talking about. It's like an ideological thing. They refuse to burn down, cut trees, or damage the landscape in any way during their attacks. They won't use anything incendiary for fear, or explosive for fear of the damage they do to the land. Yep, totally ideological. I love that. So I think there's going to be some geographical problem that they have, right? Where it's like, I was talking about how I like the idea that they march an army, the enemy marches an enemy, the League marches an army around the Cradle all the way around through the mountains and then comes over at it from the west, right? That like, and it's something that you know about. They won't fight on Sunday. But it's something that like the party knows about. Like they hear it, or their spies tell them they're marching all the way around to the other side, right? Or maybe they even like march through the spoils. That's cool. Like one of the armies marches through there. Like it's gotta be a geographical thing. Like what's something going on with the mountains that like does not favor them? They have the high ground, which as we all know is the only thing that matters in a sword fight. But is there some kind of an opening, or like are there caves that they can't close? Or no, because they could close them with like bone walls and gates and stuff, right? Like what's like a geographical limitation? I like the idea of involving the spoils in some way. I think that's cool. I was thinking that they like would refuse to walk on the spoils or to go there at all. But the problem with that is that like they have historically, because they did do some fighting in the Night Wars, God, what is it? If they like some kind of geographical issue, like there's a pass that they're vulnerable in, or there's another way in, there's some kind of a Like, what's their weak point that, you know, makes them hard to defend against attack from? You know, that's a technological thing, but like, does the league have some kind of a weapon that they can use at range, like siege weapons or something like that? Won't go over or under this natural bridge. Interesting. That feels ideological, but it definitely leans into the geography thing. God, yeah, I wish there was like a good, like maybe you make it like there's a particular pass or something that has to be open and they can't build on it. But that feels just kind of like the thing where they won't dig ditches or whatever, right? Like, God, this is a tricky one. We might need to come back to it. I want it to be more like the terrain works against them here than it is that they have some ideological problem with it, you know, because we've got so much of that already. But it is stronger if it's like, hey, if you would change your way of thinking about this would make it easier, right? I just worry that this is like, obviously I'm signing up for it, but I worry that if it's so much of like, I refuse, I won't do that. If it's more just kind of like an uglier reality of their situation. Ooh, they do earthquakes? That's cool, Alan. Yeah, especially if like they have if the druids of City C split themselves off. The druids of City C are known for their earth-shaping powers. Yeah, that's cool. And thus use earthquakes to rattle and demoralize the orcs. Yeah, that's cool. They use the surrounding mountains are prone to landslides that consistently crush them. Yeah, something like that. Like, I want there to be like one bad place that's like hard for them to defend. I'll just put that down. I'll say like, I love the idea of the like earthquakes. That's great. There's one bad pass. Jordan says, mountains in Montana have a number of timber falls due to storms. Landslides that could create large pathways that would be hard to defend if you can clear them out or not build anything back. Yeah. But not build anything back. That's cool. Yeah. Perhaps they even open passages in the mountains to make the invasion easier. It's hard to defend. Ooh, maybe on the western side. That, like, I liked the idea that you see this army that's marching its way north and around and trying to get over here, like, to this western pass. Or maybe it's in the spoils or whatever, right? But they have, like, one that's bad and they can't get into it, right? And so, like, they can't really defend it very well because of the way it's positioned and, like, whatever it is. And so they see one of the armies headed there, and they're kind of like, oh, shit, if that army is allowed to get to that place, they're going to have a very easy time getting into the Cradle, right? Yeah, I think that's cool. Okay, I mean, I'm kind of losing steam. I think this is it, y'all. I think this is really strong. There's already a lot of story in here, right? Like, about their defenses and their weaknesses, and, like, tons with the cities in the league. I think that's really cool. I feel like I have a pretty strong idea of Throka's Cradle and who that is, and what their culture is like, because it is just kind of like the purest distillation of the sort of orcish spirit. But yeah, I think that's cool. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I need, but I feel pretty good about that. Yeah, I think we might call it, everybody. I'm really surprised. I was worried that this was going to be one of those, like, because I haven't done it in like months, and because it's not about dwarves, it was going to be harder. But I really appreciate everybody coming out. Yeah, a couple of weeks before I run this, but we may do more streams about just general Ondûn world building, because this was fun and really helped me flesh out a bunch of stuff. I'll have to think of all these names now, the leagues and the city names. Orcish names are kind of tough because they have that cluster consonant rule that I made for myself that's now shooting me in the foot. But, you know, maybe because they have Yeah, it wouldn't be. Jordan says they wouldn't be offending the ancient traditions by simply clearing the dead timbers, and they know the Cradle can't build any fortifications with the now cleared land. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I dig it. I think there's a lot here. Thanks for coming, everybody. I appreciate it. Yeah, good stream, Alan. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Alan and Jordan in particular for coming out, but I know Joey popped in here for a little bit too. Thanks, Joey. It's lovely to see you. We will be back, I think, on Tuesday with an adventure prep stream. Thanks for being here, everybody. If you like this content, please consider subscribing to the channel if you're not already. You can find me on Twitter and Discord and Patreon, where you get a bunch of fancy stuff that I make for y'all to enjoy. Go check us out there. Now we have streams all throughout the week. Sometimes on Saturdays we do gaming, like video gaming, mostly Sea of Thieves. Tuesdays I do adventure prep. Thursdays it's Monster Workshop, and then here on Sunday sometimes it's world building. Next week I have a game, so I will not be able to do it next Sunday, but maybe the Sunday after that. We will see. Thank you so much for all this. Now I want to sit down and like do all this work because I want to come up with these names. I'm tired of calling them just the League and City A and City B. But thank you so much for coming, everyone. Until next time, happy adventuring. Thanks for tuning in.